guys, today we are going to make borscht, which is a beet, cabbage, potato, kind of like a brothy stew, or it's more of a soup. And it's a Ukrainian food, and I have a kind of vaguely Ukrainian background, but it's a really good way to use garden produce, of which I still have quite a lot of, like beets. We grew quite a bit of beets this year. So what I'm going to start with, beets take a really long time to cook. So when I make borscht, I do not cook beets in with the rest of the ingredients because it'll take like an hour basically for the beets to actually get tender, and then everything else gets super overcooked. So what I like to do is essentially boil the beets whole, and I just like set them on a pot and walk away for a while until they're fork tender. Once they're cooked, the skins slip right off with your thumbs. Very, very easy, so you don't have to get super messy peeling the beets. And once the beets are cooked, I proceed to make the entire soup. So I have a pot of water coming to a boil right now. I'm not going to bother getting too crazy with the washing of these. I'm just going to rinse off some dirty chunks. But for the most part, when we're boiling and then peeling the skin, that's going to deal with all the dirt. So if there's any extra little bits of dirt hanging out. So in order to prep them for the pot, super simple. All I'm going to do is cut off the root end and the stem end, and that's it. Yeah, and just pop it in the pot. So these are two pretty big beets. I think when they're cooked, it's going to be about 1.5 cups to 2 cups of diced beets. So, I mean, I don't usually measure the beets when I'm making borscht. I just kind of eyeball it. Like if my beets are of decent size or if I have like several small ones. It only takes a little beet to color the entire borscht with this like glorious neon pink kind of fuchsia color. So I don't overdo it on the beets, but yeah, it's probably about 1.5 cups worth of beets. And apparently my pot is not big enough and these are not fully submerged. So I'm going to top it up, put on a lid, let them simmer until they're cooked, and then we'll come back and make some borscht. All right, you guys, the beets are fork tender, so it is time to make our borscht. Now, this is going to be some amount of chopping because it's basically entirely a vegetable soup. So there is some upfront work, I don't know, 10 minutes or so to chop everything, but it creates a huge pot and you'll be able to have leftovers for quite a while. So we're going to start with the onion in the pot, and I have some olive oil heating up over medium heat right now. So I'm going to cut off the stem end, and I'll just show you so you can see how I cut onions. I used to have to cut a lot of onions in a professional kitchen and learned some shortcuts. So first thing I do is I slice it in half, and then once it's sliced in half, that's when I peel it, because I find it's much easier to peel off the outer skin of the onion once it's already been sliced in half. And from here, I'm gonna dice it. So step one is to basically trace your knife all the way around the perimeter of the onion, following the natural curves in the onion. So I'm just slicing, and I'm not cutting all the way through. I'm stopping about, I don't know, like 1 centimeter from the root end, and I'm just going all the way around with my knife in about like 1/4 inch slices. And I'll show you the magic that happens once you've done this. So the the stem end is holding everything together. I've sliced it all the way around, following the curvature of the onion. And then I cut in the opposite direction in 1/4 inch pieces, and it creates the world's easiest dice. Nothing, like my onion isn't slipping or sliding around. Super, super efficient. So you can do a ton of onions that way, really, really easy. I'll just do it one more time with the other half of the onion. So I'm slicing not all the way to the end, about 1 centimeter from the end. So I have basically onion rings, and then I cut in the opposite direction, 1/4 inch, and that gives me a dice. And my eyes are watering. Woo! Okay, so oil feels hot. I'm gonna get this in the pan. You can hear that sizzle of the onions hitting the pan, and yeah, I definitely need to rinse my cutting board, or else I'm gonna be crying for the rest of this video. Actually, one thing I mentioned in the vegan cooking challenge course that I've created at least once is that wearing contact lenses is a way to not have onions burn your eyes. Pro tip. So while that's going, that's a gnarly garlic, I'm gonna get a couple cloves of garlic prepared, and I'll show you. This is just like if you took a look at my Punjabi lobia recipe previously. This is always how I prep my garlic, and I'm just cutting off kind of the gross part. It's super, super easy. So I just peel the garlic by smashing off the paper, and then grating it on a microplane grater. So I just do this, And then I don't have to deal with mincing or dicing, and the garlic flavor gets more infused in the entire batch of soup. So it's efficient and it's good for the flavor profile. So I'm just going to set that garlic on my cutting board and let it, just hang out there until it's ready to go in. What I want to do, while the onions are sauteing, I should actually get a wooden spoon and start stirring that around, is I want to get these translucent. I don't want them to get too sweet. So I'm not going to cook them in the pan for too long until they get brown. I more just want to make them white and transparent to take the raw edge off the onion. And then I'm going to start adding in my other veggies. So I realized that I forgot to grab carrots, so I'm going to do that right now. All right, so you want about 2 medium carrots. Since mine are really teeny, tiny little carrots, I'm going to use, 5. They don't need to be peeled, though, because these are pretty clean and soft, tender carrots. So I'm just going to give them like a quick rinse, and they should be good to go. So I'm going to prep my, it's kind of some gunk on there. I'm going to cut off the root ends of the carrot. I always have to think about that one. And then basically, since these are really small, I'm just going to cut them in circles. But if you have fatter tomatoes, I would slice them lengthwise and cut into half-moon shapes. We don't want to make these like super thick. I mean, think about how you like to eat soup, right? You don't want giant chunks of veggies in your soup, probably. So I'm just cutting these in about 1/4-inch rounds. Now, I'm doing all 5 at once because I kind of trust my skills. But notice that I'm keeping my fingertips curved in, which prevents kitchen accidents. So I definitely want to keep those digits safe when you are cutting. And the best way is to just not have your fingertips sticking out when you're cutting anything. So I'm just going to finish my carrot rounds. And the carrot and the garlic will go in pretty much at the same time. The garlic will go in just a little bit ahead. But while everything's going and cooking, I like getting my veggies all nice and prepped. And I also like to drop carrot on the floor. I wonder if you guys saw that. Some carrot explosions. No, didn't work. Tried it, didn't work. Okay, let's see how our onion's doing. It's starting to get a little more translucent. I'll let that cook for another minute or 2 before I add anything else. And in the meantime, I can start getting my potatoes washed. So I have garden potatoes in this bag. You want about the equivalent of about like two medium-sized potatoes, but again, since these guys are pretty small, these are like little fingerlings from my garden. I'm gonna use about 5. And like pretty much any soup recipe in history, precision is not mandatory when you're making something like a vegetable soup, something like borscht. So I never get too hung up on precise measurements. I basically just, I don't know, how much potato do I want in here, and I kind of wing it. So I want about like 5 smallish potatoes. I think that'll be about right. There's a lot of other things going in this soup, like a lot of cabbage and the beets, of course, for example. So I don't need to go like, ooh, this is a dirty one. So I don't need to go like too wild with that. So I think it's time to stir my onions right away. If you have store-bought potatoes, you probably don't need to spend quite as much effort scrubbing them. And you can peel them if you like, if potato skins in your soup bug you. I'm not going to peel mine because these are really, the skins of my garden potatoes are just super, super tender. So yeah, not something I'm really going to worry about. Okay, so nice and translucent, so I'm going to get the garlic happening in there for about 30 seconds. Let that cook. And just, again, take off the raw edge of the garlic, and then we'll get the carrots in. And basically, we'll put in the vegetables one by one as I cut them. Which, after this, is just the beets and the cabbage. So borscht is Ukrainian soup, like I mentioned, using produce that grows really abundantly in the summertime of cold climates. And even, it's a good storage vegetable thing too, because if you think about the crops that store the longest, like cabbage and potatoes and carrots and beets, all store really, really well. So, get out of my way, potatoes. So I'm going to get the carrots in here, and I'm going to add a bit of water, because things are starting to brown in there, and I don't want them to get too dark, and get like overly caramelized and sweet. So we're just going to grab what I've got handy. It's about a 1/4 cup of water, and that'll help the carrots cook down a little bit too. And buy me some time while I chop my potatoes in about 1/2 inch chunks. I like I said, I like small bites of things. So if I have pretty small bites of carrots in there, I want my potatoes to be about the same size, because it'd be very weird if I had like a giant potato chunk and like these small teeny carrot chunks. Think about what you want on your spoon. Like if you want a nice balanced spoonful of borscht, it's like a few pieces of everything, or like a piece of everything. But if you have like giant potato chunks, then you might just get like a piece of potato all on its own with no other flavor on it. So I just like thinking in terms of the balance that I want everything to have. So there are some like dirt chunks that I couldn't quite scrub off, so I'm just doing like this is basically like a knife peel. It's like a targeted peel. I'm just kind of scraping off with my knife any parts that look like I don't want them in my soup. And then I slice my potato long, and since these are little guys, I then slice them in half, turn them around, and create a simple dice. And it looks like this is going to give me somewhere in the ballpark of, I don't know, 1.5 cups of chopped tomatoes. But again, don't get too hung up on the amount, because like going a little more, going a little less, you're not going to have any issues at all. I promise. Because one of the like vegetable soups are very difficult to get wrong. The biggest things that you can get wrong are lack of seasoning, basically. So lack of salt or flavor is usually the worst part of a brothy vegetable soup and the easiest way to go wrong. But in terms of like slightly getting the measurements off, it's not gonna really create a lot of problems. So we'll address that. First, I'm gonna get the potatoes in there. And at this point, I'm pretty much ready to put in my vegetable broth. So I'm gonna measure in, I think I have a cup measure in my dishwasher actually, I'm using it. So I'm gonna measure out 4 cups of water, and then I'm gonna use vegetable bouillon cubes. If you have better than bouillon, like the paste, that would be perfect. That's my favorite, but I didn't have it at the store last time, so I grabbed cubes because that's what they had. And I much prefer using vegetable broth to salt, because salt is one-dimensional. Like, it's good, it adds flavor. It makes the flavor of everything in your soup pop, but that's the only flavor it is. Whereas vegetable broth has like a mix of flavors all in it, so I find it much more like well-rounded as a flavor profile. So, I mean, you can use salt in a pinch, but I don't prefer it. So here's a head of green cabbage, and I'll show you how I would prep this for borscht. I'm going to use about 2 cups of shredded cabbage. So first things first, I'm going to cut off this root and some of the tough outer leaves alongside it. Just the outer leaves are usually a little thicker and look kind of discolored. So now it can sit flat on my cutting board. I'm going to cut it in half, and just be careful when you're working with something big like this. And put 1/2 of it away. Actually, I'm probably only going to be using about 1/4 of this cabbage. Once it's in half, I cut it in half again, so that I essentially have quarters of beet. These aren't beets, these are cabbage. And then this allows me to core it really easily, because the core of the cabbage is basically right here. So if I cut it a triangle and angle it downward, then the core of my cabbage is gone. Easy. Don't have to deal with it anymore. Now, to create like a nice ribbon, like nice cabbage shreds, this is too fat to work with, so I'm going to cut this again. If this were a pie, this would now be in 1/8. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice in kind of at this angle all the way from the bottom to the top. So I'm making about 1-inch ribbons of cabbage by cutting at an angle. Whereas if I cut straight ahead, the ribbons might be a little shorter. And I'm just keeping my fingers tucked in to keep everything held together properly. Trying to just slide my knife through pretty gently. And then there's a couple big pieces that are still kind of like a tough outer skin. I'm just going to get rid of that. So we're going to do the same thing with the other 1/8 of the cabbage. Now, there are a variety of ways to do this. This is kind of like my easy, lazy way to do it, because this is going to cook for so long. It's going to cook for like half an hour that the cabbage is going to get like basically like tender and translucent. So I don't need to worry about having like the perfect shreds for this. So that looks like about 2-ish cups of cabbage. So my water's boiling now. I'm going to get that in there. I'm going to get my beets in there, and then I'll add the broth, and we are good to go. So as a final step, here I go with my beets. So I have 2 cups. I have 2 large beets that I cooked, and I know they're done because I stabbed a fork in them, and they're totally tender. So I'm going to drain them. They're going to be really hot because they were just sitting in boiling water. So I'm going to run some cold water over them, and essentially the cold water is going to keep me from burning my hands. It's going to cool off the beets. But at this point, if your beets are well cooked, hopefully you can see this, but the skin just like, it just slides right off. And I usually just leave the skin in the strainer, and then I throw it in the garbage later. So I have a peeled beet now. It's super, super easy. Just using your thumbs, running your thumbs all along the outside of the beets should allow the skin to just slip off like a nice, snug slipper, and allow the, why are beets feet in my comparison right now? But that is the way of it. So I have 2 peeled beets now. I'm just making sure. And yeah, it's time to, oh, there's a little piece on that. Time to dice it up for my soup. I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit. So I'm going to dice them in the same size that I had my potato pieces. So about 1/2 inch of beet piece is what I'm looking for. So I slice them lengthwise, and then I basically make beet fries, like sticks of beet, stacking them up. And yes, my fingers and cutting board are going to turn pink, but I'll rinse them in between to save myself the staining. And then I cut in the opposite direction of the fry, and I have a cube. So I'm going to rinse my hand, minimize the beet impact. And yeah, my hand is only like very lightly pink. That'll come off with soap. Don't worry about getting any beet stain, because it does like come off from your skin after a couple hand washes. Even if it's like pretty darkly stained, it does come off. It's kind of like turmeric. It's just like a temporary look, a temporary gory look. So I'm cutting into fry shapes. And even though this isn't a ton of beet, like I mentioned earlier, this is going to turn the whole thing bright pink. Now, you're not going to see it as much when it's freshly cooked. You're going to see it as leftovers the next day. When you put this in the fridge to store, the next day when you go to heat up leftovers, it's the most beautiful color. It's not even going to, like what I'm going to show you today when it's done cooking, is not even going to be on the same level as what the leftovers look like. Next day, borscht is the best borscht. It not only looks the most beautiful, but the flavors have had time to mingle and just kind of like hang out. So I'm getting the beets in there so they can infuse. That was probably about 2 cups of chopped beets, cooked beets. And they're going to infuse the borscht with their beautiful color. So I'm just gonna rinse this off to get some of my beet juice off the cutting board. And same thing, beet juice isn't gonna permanently stain your cutting board, so don't worry about that. It's just gonna be like a temporary hue. So the next step is to get some bouillon cube in here. Now I've never used this brand before. So when I'm deciding how much salt content I want in my soup, I just look at how much is a cube. So 1 cube is about 1,400 milligrams of sodium. Now, if I think about 1 serving of soup, so like a lunch portion, maybe with some bread, I probably wouldn't want to have 1 portion of soup more than 400 milligrams of sodium, because if you think about our daily limit being about 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day, then that basically gives us about 700 milligrams per meal. So this bowl of soup, I probably wouldn't want more than 400 milligrams, assuming you're eating it with other salt-containing foods. So this is essentially equivalent to about, I would even say this is like 4 bowls of soup. So you know what? I'm just going to use 1 cube in the whole soup. And if I need to add more salt, then that's great. But I think 1 cube should be more than enough to give this a bit of flavor to start. Now, I'm glad to see that this is a really soft, easily dissolvable cube. So I'm just going to break it into little pieces and put it in the boiling water. And that should totally dissolve without me having to pre-dissolve it, which is convenient. If you have like a brick of a bouillon cube, you're going to need to dissolve it in hot water before you add it to your soup. So I'm just going to stir that in. And basically, we're at a point where I'm going to let this cook for about half an hour. I want the potatoes and the carrots especially to get really, really tender. And the cabbage. Once we're at that point, we are going to add the dill, which is basically a non-essential component of borscht. It is not borscht without crushed dill, which also grows abundantly in cold climates. So hence why this is such a, Ukrainian food classic. So I've got a bunch here, and we're not going to put any of the, we're going to not use the stems, but we're not going to waste a bunch of dill. I'm not going to get you to like buy an herb and then only use half of it. We're going to use all of this dill because we want this to be like so dilly. And that's, yeah, part of the beauty of borscht. So I'm going to rinse this and leave it on my cutting board and let it dry out on my cutting board a little bit while I wait for my borscht to simmer. And we'll come back when it's been about half an hour. All right, you guys, so it's been about half an hour and everything in the borscht is really well cooked. I just stuck in my fork to make sure the potatoes were super tender. And since I didn't cover it at all, I wanted to just add a little bit of liquid back into this because I want this to be a pretty brothy soup. Oftentimes when I'm reheating it as well, I'll add a little bit of liquid because in storage, like when it's in the fridge, it can tend to absorb a bit of the water. So you can just kind of go for it. Now, I'm going to just chop this dill, basically. It's dried. It's been sitting on my cutting board, which makes it easier to handle. So it's already clumped together. I'm just going to tuck in my fingers and slide my knife back and forth on the cutting board, just bit by bit. And yeah, this is like incredibly simple because the dill is all nicely bunched together already. And once I start getting into the hard stem part, that's usually when I stop. And I'm just going to do one more rough pass by holding the tip of my knife with my hand and using my handle, my left hand. Oh, that smells so good. I love the smell of fresh dill. Oh, that's summer. That is summer, you guys. It's not summer, but it smells like summer. And I'm just going to dump this dill in the pot and then it's pretty much done. Now, this does benefit from vinegar. Pretty much every borscht recipe you're going to come across uses some kind of vinegar in it to brighten it up. What I like to do is add some lemon juice in the bowl. So instead of adding, because what happens is when you add lemon juice to the pot, the flavor kind of disappears after a day, like the brightness. But if you put it in the bowl when you serve it, it just, it comes to life. It doesn't get lost. So I'm going to grab a lemon and I'm going to grab a bowl and I'm going to grab a ladle and we're gonna, oh, this is kind of dirty. I gotta like move some stuff out of the way. And we're gonna make this happen. So, looks beautiful. You'll see it in a moment. I'll bring it up close so you can have a look at the fresh off the stove version of the borscht. Like I said, the second day borscht is like the truly beautiful, perfect borscht of champions. But this still looks just amazing. This is like the king of soups. Now, people will serve this with sour cream, and that's completely delicious. I've done that with vegan sour cream before. But you can just eat it like this too, and it's great. All right, here's a very steamy, up close and personal look at what's going on with this borscht. It's very fragrant. Now I have a lisp. It's very fragrant, a little bit sweet. And comforting. It sticks to your ribs. It's hearty, but it's pretty low in calories and is totally delicious. And this, like I said, everything in here, like the carrots, the potatoes and everything is going to turn bright fuchsia in a day, which is like the most fun part of this. And that is all there is to it, you guys. Thank you for joining me on this soup cooking adventure, and I'll catch you in tomorrow's video.